President Trump, Biden admin, is worst in U.S. history. President Trump called Joe Biden the worst leader in the history of the U.S. and blamed him for the embarrassing failure in Afghanistan when he left $85 billion worth of military equipment with the Taliban. During an interview at his Florida Mar-a-Lago resort on Saturday, Trump voiced many concerns and issues surrounding the leadership of the Biden administration. He accused Biden for the mishandling of the border crisis, runaway inflation, and lingering COVID fears under the leadership he deemed as a failed administration. "I think you have to say an F and not an F+. It would be an F. It's a failed administration. It's a disaster. I've never seen anything like it, and by the way, I wish he'd do well," said Trump. "You know, I love the country more than I love anything. Family, God, country, you know we have to take care of our country. I would love to see him do well. I don't think there has ever been a greater embarrassment as an administration. And we had everything ready to go. It was ... We handed him on a plate whether it was the border or Afghanistan. We were getting out, but we were going to get out with great dignity and strength." The 45th president went on to say how he lost respect for Gen. Mark Milley for agreeing with Biden and saying it would be cheaper to leave the military equipment in the hands of the Taliban instead of bringing it back to the U.S. Although he hasn't officially announced if he would be running in the next election, Trump stressed he could solve a lot of the problems created by Democrats and pointed out Biden isn't capable of handling gas prices and broader energy issues. He claimed he could get the price of gasoline down within 6 months. Trump further said Biden has destroyed U.S. energy independence and betrayed America's national interest on many fronts. Meanwhile, amid the countless number of issues the country is facing, the 45th president hopes the current administration can start making smarter decisions moving forward. G20 offers little new on climate, leaving uphill task for 26 Colombian pesos. Leaders of the group of 20 major economies agreed on a final statement on Sunday that urged meaningful and effective action to limit global warming. But angering climate activists, https://www.reuters.com/world/Europe/thousands demonstrate Rome G20 discuss climate 2021-1030 by offering few concrete commitments. The result of days of tough negotiation among diplomats leaves huge work to be done at the broader United Nations 26 Colombian pesos climate summit in Scotland, which starts this week. U.S. President Joe Biden said he was disappointed that more could not have been done and blamed China and Russia for not bringing proposals to the table. The disappointment relates to the fact that Russia and China basically didn't show up in terms of any commitments to deal with climate change, Biden told reporters. Although the G20 pledged to stop financing coal power overseas, they set no timetable for phasing it out at home and watered down the wording on a promise to reduce emissions of methane, another potent greenhouse gas. However, Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi, who chaired the Rome gathering, hailed the final accord, saying that for the first time all G20 states had agreed on the importance of capping global warming at the 1.5 degrees Celsius level that scientists say is vital to avoid disaster. "We made sure that our dreams are not only alive but they are progressing," Draghi told a closing news conference, brushing off criticism from environmentalists that the G20 had not gone nearly far enough to resolve the crisis. The G20, which includes Brazil, China, India, Germany, and the United States, accounts for 60% of the world's population and an estimated 80% of global greenhouse gas emissions. The 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold https://www.reuters.com/business/environment/climate targets making sense promises 2021-1018 is what an experts say must be met to avoid a dramatic acceleration of extreme climate events like droughts, storms, and floods, and to reach it they recommend net zero emissions should be achieved by 2050. The stakes are huge, among them the very survival of low-lying countries, the impact on economic livelihoods the world over, and the stability. https://www.reuters.com/business/cop/climate change. What are economic stakes? 2021-1025 of the global financial system. This was a moment for the G20 to act with the responsibility they have as the biggest emitters, yet we only see half measures rather than concrete urgent action, said Friedrich Roeder, vice president of sustainable development advocacy group Global Citizen. The final summit document said current national plans on how to curb emissions will have to be strengthened if necessary, and makes no specific reference to 2050 as a date to achieve net zero carbon emissions. "We recognize that the impacts of climate change at 1.5 degrees Celsius are much lower than at 2 degrees Celsius. Keeping 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach will require meaningful and effective actions and commitment by all countries," the communique said. Consequences of inaction. The leaders only recognized the key relevance of halting net emissions by or around mid-century. This removed the 2050 date seen in previous versions of the final statement so as to make the target less specific. China, the world's biggest CO2 emitter, has set a target date of 2060, and other large polluters such as India and Russia have also not committed to the 2050 target date. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said the agreement was a good signal for 26 Colombian pesos. But Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau signaled he would have liked to see more ambition. There's no question that Canada, along with a number of other countries, would have liked stronger language and stronger commitments on the fight against climate change than others. He told reporters on Experts say that even if current national plans are fully implemented, the world is headed for global warming of 2.7 degrees Celsius. With catastrophic consequences, Draghi predicted that nations would keep on improving their plans to lower carbon emissions in the years ahead, adding that he was surprised by how far countries like China and Russia had shifted their stance in recent days. It is easy to suggest difficult things. It is very, very difficult to actually execute them, he said. The final G20 statement includes a pledge to halt financing of overseas coal-fired power generation by the end of this year, but set no date for phasing out coal power, promising only to do so as soon as possible. This replaced a goal set in a previous draft of the final statement to achieve this by the end of the 2030 seconds. Showing the strong resistance from some coal-dependent countries. The G20 also set no date for phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, saying they will aim to do so over the medium term. Methane reduction on methane, which has a more potent but less lasting impact than carbon dioxide on global warming. They diluted their wording from a previous draft that pledged to strive to reduce our collective methane emissions significantly. The final statement just recognizes that reducing methane emissions is one of the quickest, most feasible and most cost-effective ways to limit climate change. G20 sources said negotiations were tough over so-called climate financing, which refers to a 2009 pledge by rich nations to provide $100 billion per year by 2020 to help developing countries tackle climate change. They have failed to meet the pledge, generating mistrust and a reluctance among some developing nations to accelerate their emissions reductions. However, Draghi said the funding gap had narrowed to less than $20 billion and predicted it could be closed further, with wealthy nations considering using financing from the International Monetary Fund to make up the shortfall. World leaders will kickstart 26 Colombian pesos on Monday with 2 days of speeches that could include some new emissions-cutting pledges. Before technical negotiators lock horns over the rules, the United Nations said last week greenhouse gas concentrations hit a record in 2020 and the world was way off track in capping rising temperatures. Youngkin campaigns involve. Ahead of gubernatorial race, Republican gubernatorial candidate Glenn Youngkin continues his campaign in Alexandria, Virginia as the highly anticipated gubernatorial race approaches. The businessman campaigned in the state's most liberal city Saturday morning in hopes of gaining more support from the increasingly purple state. Some of the key policies the candidate aims to bring to Virginia include better jobs and wages, lower taxes, safer communities, and better schools. The Republican supporters have said his view on the state's family education system is a crucial factor in backing the candidate for the upcoming election. What we will not do is teach our children to view everything through a lens of race, said Youngkin. We won't pin them against each other and steal their dreams. It runs directly in the face of those immortal words of Dr. Martin Luther King, where he implored us to be better than ourselves. He implored us to judge one another based on the content of our character and not the color of our skin. Parents across the country have consistently voiced their concerns over the left's push for critical race theory in school curriculums. It is believed that this policy alone could shift the state from blue to red for the first time in over a decade, although recent polls have showed Democrat rival and former Gov. Terry McAuliffe is slightly ahead in the race. Youngkin claims he's winning with parents in the state to a large extent. We're actually seeing parents come up. Our most recent polling that we've all seen shows that I'm winning with parents in a huge degree, said Youngkin. We've got a giant surge from the Latino community. We see minority voters actually supporting Republicans for the first time in a long time. And that's because we, in fact, are going to go deliver on the things that are most important to Virginians. Low taxes, best jobs, the best schools, safe communities, and government that works for us. With the Democrat-led Congress failing to deliver its campaign promises and Joe Biden's approval ratings declining, Democrats in Virginia are increasingly losing hope and support for the left. Republican mayoral candidate for the city of Alexandria, Annetta Catchings, showed up to the campaign to offer support for Youngkin. It's about parents seeing the direction of the country in terms of crime, in terms of education affordability, and they're taking the lead on this. They're saying enough is enough and they're getting involved in politics. Catchings stated. Meanwhile, the left worries Youngkin's increasing popularity could potentially cost Democrats the win. But only time will tell. The results of the competitive race are set to be announced on Nov. 2.